Ralph Vacchiano from New York Daily News joining us. He covers the Giants. Ralph, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Pretty good. Ralph, I can only imagine how nervous the fan base is when you try and implement a new offense, and it seems as though the starters throughout the entire preseason complete 4 passes. Well, what is the tone right now with the fan base in this new offense they're trying to give Eli Manning? Because there have been some hiccups.
Well, the fan base is panicky, but honestly, they're all over the map because, and I'm obviously not speaking for anybody in specific, but in general, they seem to want to run the old offensive coordinator out of town last year. They're not saying that old offense didn't work. It had passed its prime, and the NFL had moved on, and now, well, the Giants moved on to something else, and it looks like a disaster. So there's a lot of worry, but everybody needs to calm down a little bit. I mean, Eli Manning is a good quarterback. We can argue where in the top 15 he belongs, but you're not going to find 15 quarterbacks better than him in the NFL. I know he had a terrible year last year, but this isn't a guy who's going to go out there and go 1 for 7 for 6 yards. He's going to be a decent quarterback, maybe make some mistakes, and in general, eventually this thing will be fine. The only real question is how quickly does that happen, and how much of a hole do they dig themselves in the meantime?
Is there any truth to the idea that he could just be aging less gracefully than his brother at 33? And that's why, I think the concerning part is that the Giants have him only signed through 2015. Are they showing that they want to see more from Eli this year before the deal is done?
Well, I think there were some financial reasons and salary cap reasons not to get it done in the offseason. Honestly, right. I don't think Eli Manning was pretty eager to negotiate coming off a 27 interception season either. So they weren't going to do that. Could he be aging less gracefully? Sure, but that's not something we're going to know for a few years. I think mostly based on last year, you have to look beyond the numbers and look at the reasons for his big decline.
Mm-hmm.
It was no room to throw. I mean, the pressure from the offensive line was such a disaster in front of him. Most of the time he was rushing his throws. He was hit a record number of times. And quite frankly, his receivers weren't all that good either. So I think there are circumstances that led to that more than anything that had to do with him.
Ralph Vacchiano of New York Daily News joining us here on Tim and Sid. We're getting you ready for the NFL season, looking at the New York Giants side of things. Ralph, from your seat, the new offense that Ben McAdoo is trying to implement with the Giants, more of a dink and dunk thing. How much potential do you think that has with the personnel that they have?
What's interesting is I really don't know what he's trying to implement yet. I just know what they've run in the preseason, which they swear is not everything.
Okay.
It certainly will be more of a West Coast style offense, and I do think that fits. I'm taking a little leap of faith here, believing that Eli Manning can throw quick passes regularly as opposed to what he's done in the past. But I think they've got running backs now that can be a help out of the backfield. I think some of their receivers, Victor Cruz is a guy who can make people miss. So if you get him the ball quickly off the line of scrimmage, he has the ability to turn that into a long gain. I think Ruben Randall has that as well. Their third receiver, Terrell Jernigan, is a much lesser version of that, but that's also his game. So the personnel fits in every way except for 2 important parts. One is I think their tight ends are terrible. I don't know what they're going to get out of that position. That was supposed to be a big part of it. And the other is the offensive line that is right now banged up and has a lot of question marks. And I don't know whether they'd be good blockers no matter what the style of the offense is.
Well, that's the interesting part of this, because if you want to take the positive for the New York Giants and say, hey, they were 7-9 last year and lost the most man games to injury in the league, at least among starters, you could argue that this team should be incrementally better this year just based on being healthy, but in the preseason they're banged up again.
Yeah, I mean, they should be. And honestly, I haven't made a prediction yet, but my thought is they are incrementally better. They've upgraded the talent and they've upgraded the depth. But those injuries, it's not that they have as many injuries as last year. It's that they've got them in a very key spot along the offensive line. And that's a problem to me when you're also counting on a lot of other things to happen. You're hoping that all the money they spent in the secondary, that unit will come together. You're hoping that Jason Pierre-Paul at defensive end will be a premier pass rusher again. I'm hoping that Ruben Randall can be a number 1 style receiver. They have a lot of ifs on this team. They didn't need to make the offensive line one of them, and that's a big issue to me.
Ralph, before we let you go, and based on the questions with the offense, I'm curious your take on this. We've been asking everybody for a fantasy sleeper. You just mentioned Ruben Randall. That might be the guy who, for those listening, who's the breakout fantasy guy this year on that team?
Well, I'm not sure this qualifies as a sleeper because he's going to be their number one running back, but I don't think Rashad Jennings is going to be high up on anybody's fantasy charts based on what he's done in the past, which has really been a backup. But I thought last year in the games he started for the Oakland Raiders, he was as good and powerful a runner as there was in the league. He is a very under-the-radar pass catcher as well, and the Giants plan to use him. And quite frankly, especially if they can't get their tight ends going and if they can't find a reliable third receiver, they may use him a lot. I think he has the ability and the potential to be sort of like Tiki Barber used to be for them, the do-everything guy in the offense. Maybe not with the same gaudy numbers that Tiki had in his prime, but they will give him that opportunity to get them because he's going to be a big part of this offense. And honestly, other than Victor Cruz, he might be the only guy I'd want to get high up in my fantasy draft off this team.
I was doing my fantasy draft yesterday, and there was a lot I was just doing my last minute reading. There's a lot of people trying to make a point that Andre Williams was a sexy pick, a sleeper late, maybe the thunder to the lightning. Do you see any of that in Andre Williams?
Well, he is going to be the thunder to the lightning. I don't know how much he's going to be used yet. The history is Tom Coughlin does not like to rely heavily on rookies, so I would be wary of that. That being said, he did get some goal line carries in the preseason, and a couple of times they were in that situation. So it's possible that they'll use him in that kind of a role, but I think Jennings will end up being the main guy. I think probably at best for Williams, 3-4 series a game if everything goes well, maybe a couple of goal line carries, but he won't put up the same gaudy numbers as his backfield made.
Ralph, thanks a lot for taking the time and joining us and dropping some knowledge on the Giants.
My pleasure, guys. Anytime.